Morning, everyone.
Morning, Skara.
Morning, Monique.
Morning, everybody.
Hello.
Morning, Frank Rates. You look like in quite a nice Porsche there. Yeah.
It looks like a big greenhouse you got there, Frank.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, no, this is my office. Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Morning, Ivan. Morning, Sally. Morning, Graham. First, I thought Graham Smith, the cricketer, was joining us.
Graham, switch your mic on and switch your camera on. We can have a look at you. Bloody Australians. Don't know what to do.
There shall be no bullying, Mike.
Can be plenty of bullying.
Now can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can
there he is.
now.
There you go, you see?
Good
It
to have
works.
you. Good to have you.
Even in Australia it works.
Ah, lovely, lovely. Thank you, everyone. Well, we will start. Thank you for joining once again. These talks, we have Mark Bellingan of Common Architecture. It's a practice that was formed in 2014 by Mark, and David Walker, his partner, joined in 2017. They primarily do luxury resorts, if you like, in exotic islands, etc. And Mark actually comes from a class that I think was quite a special class. The class of Mark, D-Team Dagane in Joburg, Nicole, I think, is on the call here, Ricardo, all these guys, Mark Rosten. I mean, if Tony Wilson gives you an airport to design as a class, you must be very, very special. So it's one of those classes, very special classes. That's where Mark comes from. So Mark, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Skura. Thank you, everyone. I'd actually thought about Tony Wilson a lot while I was preparing this talk. It was a good few years. Okay. So I'm going to do something slightly differently with this talk. I'm going to do an introduction to myself and to the company with a bit of history. And then I want to talk about, like I said, with the title, a way of practicing. So I want to think about the way that we're practicing without trying to say that that's how everybody should be practicing. And hopefully it can start a bit of a conversation. So I started, my story is actually very similar to Mark Oswald's, who spoke a few weeks ago, and Mark works with me. And that I grew up in Durban North. I think I had a very non-design and quite sheltered upbringing. But for whatever reason, I developed an interest in architecture pretty early. I think potentially because of my mom playing Lego with me from when I was very, very small. I think that's probably a huge part of it. And in standard 4, we were traveling as a family to London, and my parents gave us a book and said, well, write down all of the things you want to see when you're in London, expecting that we would put like Hamleys and Big Ben and places like that. And at the very top of my list was Lloyd's of London, the Richard Rogers building. And my parents couldn't understand why I wanted to go and see a bank while we were traveling in London. They never took me, but I ended up taking myself a few years later when I'd finished university. I didn't want to sign up for anything other than architecture when I visited SAIA-KZN. It was the only, in my mind, it was the only choice. I think you had to put 3 choices down on your application form, and I can't even remember what I put the other 2. But I knew that if I didn't get an architecture, I'd go and do something else. It wouldn't be whatever I put in number 2 and 3. I had my early career, I had a really excellent period of learning the ropes. I worked for Dean J and Paul Nell in the various capacities of their firms from 2007 to 2014, and made my way in that company from junior, bottom of the rung staff to by the end assisting in managing the practice under Dean. That was a very formative time in my career, obviously, and I think I'm really grateful for the time that I spent there in terms of how much I learned. I had excellent exposure to running projects on site, to experimenting with solutions that weren't the norm. Actually, here's some pictures. I'm wary that this is a group of people that probably are going to want to see pictures. So I've thrown some pictures in every now and then, even when I don't need them. So I also learned about experimenting with solutions that weren't within the norm. And I think with both Dean and Paul, there was a huge emphasis on what it means to put a building together. It was always an exercise in understanding the construction process, not working against it. And I think that that's really helped me in the way that I think about architecture. And I use those ways of thinking even to till today. I started the Common Architecture, as Skura said, in 2014. It was originally just me with collaborators whenever I needed extra hands. And in 2015, the company grew, and I hired my sister, who also had studied architecture. And that was to finish this project, which is Curiosity Durban, which was for an incredible client down in what was at that point the hope of Durban, I think, with the Rivertown development and all that was happening there. And that process and project was a huge opportunity, which I loved, and again learned so much from. These are just some pictures from it. In 2017, I started a second company with a friend, David Walker, who's not an architect. And our intention with that company was company was called the Moxie Works Company. And our intention with that was to design and deliver our own residential buildings in Morningside. That company took a while to get going, and in the meantime, the architectural company gained quite a bit of traction. And so at that point, David then joined Common Architecture as a partner, and we've grown.
Is this Mark? Is this the Windermere?
This is above the library, or above what was the library now above the COVID testing center, I think. Or,
okay. Yeah, sure.
This was our office until earlier this year. Yeah. So since then, our company's grown. Mark Oswald, who spoke a few months ago, joined us. Obviously, my sister was already there, and then Miriam, who's on the right, she also joined us. Miriam is from Germany, and she had moved to South Africa basically for love, but that's a whole nother story, which maybe she could tell you at another time. In addition to this core team, we've continued our approach of collaboration and bringing on people when we need to expand the team, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about that later. Most of our work is offshore, like Skura alluded to, and it's focused on leisure, hospitality, so restaurants, beach clubs, hotels, and also homes. We've worked on projects in South Africa, in Egypt, Greece, Germany, Morocco, China, Italy. I've bounced all over, Spain, Tenerife, and the Maldives. A quick story about lockdown for a bit of framing. So in February 2020, we moved into a new home with my young family. And obviously that very next month, the world decided to stay indoors for a good while. And thankfully, with 3 small kids, we had a small little walled garden, which needed some care and attention. And with the lockdown, so up until then, I'd been traveling. I was probably doing an overseas trip a month for a good 2 years before that. So I didn't really know what to do with all the free time that I had now in the lockdown. And so the garden very quickly became my lockdown project. I'm sure we all had one of those. So for context, I had no green fingers. I'd never really done any gardening in my life. And I approached the project much like an architect would approach a building project. I drew up a plan, I positioned all of the plants in my head, and then I got to executing the very, very hard labor required to get that vision done. But I was very quickly humbled by the garden. Plants didn't grow where I wanted, where I put them. The grass wasn't happy with the shade that it got, and the garden was not a success. I realized that I'd imposed my own ideas onto it, and in response, my plants had told me where they wanted to go. I want to use my garden as a bit of an analogy for what we've done at Common Architecture, because at Common, our approach, I think our approach has been quite different. We never set out to design a company. We didn't sit down and plan where we are now today, but rather we've taken small, experimental, incremental steps along the way that have led us to where we are. And in the same way, we don't believe that we design buildings out of nothing. Rather, we see the building process as one of exploration and discovery. It's almost like the building is already there and we're just getting to be involved in the process of uncovering it.
Mark,
and I think the same.
Sorry, Mark,
yeah.
Are you, in terms of your pages, I'm still on the boardroom.
Are you bored? Are you bored, Skura? I'll give you a new picture.
No. Is that where you are?
I am still on. There's another picture.
Okay,
There's
that's
another
fine.
picture for you,
No, that's fine. because I thought maybe it's me. Are you already in the garden?
No.
Okay.
No,
I'm not bored in the boardroom.
I'm not showing you pictures of my garden, Skura. It would be embarrassing.
Okay. No problem.
So I've structured my talk today around 5 problems that we've encountered running the practice and tried to solve. My goal is definitely, like I said at the beginning, not to try and tell everybody how I think that they should run their practices, but rather to share our learnings and our failings. I'm suggesting not the way of practicing, but rather a way of practicing. And I definitely want to take a posture of humility in that. And in some ways, we don't even want our practice to be the same as it is today in the coming weeks. So we're constantly experimenting and changing and progressing. So I don't actually know what's next. I think it's the first problem. Let me stop that. Am I? Yeah. So the first problem that I want to talk about is managing a company as a designer. So the problem is we get trained as architects and end up becoming managers and business owners, hardly doing any architecture. And so our current exploration in solving this, or experiment, I should say, in trying to deal with this, is we've taken a process of managing processes as opposed to managing people. We've thought about the company, but much more like a production line. David's background is in economics and production and factory work. And one of the first things we did when we started the company in 2017 was we hired a consultant who normally works with factories, examining their processes and helping them better understand them and manage them and improve on them. And we've been working with him for 5 years, thinking about how you could do the same thing with a knowledge work creative company like an architectural practice. And we've seen huge amount of benefit from working with him. His name is Pierre. And it's enabled us by focusing on the processes and getting as many of the things that we do fixed and templatized. We are able to then focus on the things that are anomalies or fit outside of the regular production line. Also through Pierre, we've spent a lot of time working on the business. So because we're process oriented, we want to improve our processes and our systems. And so at our company, each one of our staff spends 20% of their time, so 1 full day a week, on non-billable work. So we work on our templates, our own skill sets, our drawing standards, all of that. And we get the payback for that time pretty quickly normally. I wanted to show you a process that we've realized that we do very often, and give you an example of it. So this is a project that we did in Mauritius in 2017, 2018. We were working with a hotel company in Germany, and we went through this process of explaining our design thinking to the client, but also bringing them along for the ride. And at the same time, we were learning ourselves that this is a really helpful way for us to explain our buildings to our clients. And so this is a process that we've standardized and can kind of do very quickly within the company. The project is a 100-room hotel in Mauritius on the coast, and the only thing that the client told us that we absolutely had to have was a 50-meter pool, and the slope goes from the road down to the side. So the very first thing we did was put in the pool, and then think about then the building arrangement around that, in the sort of with this very strong central axis that connects the reception space all the way down to the beach. So that's the arrival. You kind of arrive between these two buildings with the building floating over the top, and this kind of almost altar-like reception desk. And then everything, the whole experience then from reception desk leads you down along the side of the pool with these smaller spaces on the sides, down to the beach at the very end. This project, so I said, started in 2018. It hasn't yet hit site. It's had many bumps along the way, but hopefully it's going into site next year. This is just an example that I wanted to show, kind of peeling back a little bit in terms of what I was talking about on RP, so improvement project work, we call it RP. Just an example of one of the things that we've done. So this was it's not a render, but this is a quote unquote render from within ArchiCAD of a project that we were working on. And this was a very basic standard of presentation that we worked on. But as we thought about our processes and worked on those, one of the RP projects that's been ongoing has been about improving our renderings. And so that was produced a couple of years ago, and this was produced a couple of weeks ago for a competition that we entered. And so we, like I said, we really get the benefit of that, and you can see, hopefully, from those two images where we've benefited from working on the business as much as working on the projects. Problem number 2 that I want to talk about is the idea of bringing clients into the garden. So if we create a walled garden for ourselves as a practice that we work inside of, we always have to show our clients what we're doing along the way, and that can be very, very difficult. And I think the main reason that it's very difficult is because generally, and I include myself, at least historically, architects are really terrible at explaining what value we add. And so our current experiment with this is that we are constantly showing and communicating with our clients what we call our current condition. So where are we in the process? And we do that through, often through this little diagram that we've developed. So traditionally with architecture, people talk about the site and they talk about the brief, and then they think about how these two things, and obviously that is largely what we do. But we've thought about this quite deeply, and we've decided that to communicate with our clients, we find it very helpful to have 3 circles where we have the site, which for us is critical. We have our own design philosophy, so we don't pretend that we're not bringing our own philosophy to the table. And then we have what we call the idea, and in our minds, the idea comes from the client. So that's the essence of who the client is, or the story that the client wants to tell through the building. So we're not, in that way, we're not as stuck up about the schedule of accommodation as being the primary thing that we're designing to. We see that as something that we absolutely have to get right. It needs to function exactly as the client requires it to. But in our minds, the idea is a much more important thing that we want to be pulling out and showing the client, well, getting from the client and then showing along the way. And then in our minds, this little asterisk in the middle is the building. But at the beginning, it's in embryonic form, and it grows, and as we all discover it together. And so we're constantly asking our clients, what's the, you know, do we all still see the same thing? I think it's very easy for people to assume that we're all looking at the same thing because we can read drawings, or because we see one thing in image and they see something else. And so we're constantly communicating with our clients and checking that we're all still seeing the same asterisks. One of the things that we learned is that clients tend to want to say yes. They want to say that they like something, because I guess, I don't know if they want to not offend, or they don't want to be shown up. But we've actually we often take the approach of asking our clients to tell us what they don't like. So we'll show them, for example, we'll show them 20 images or 50 images. They say, we really like this hotel or this place, and we'll show them 20 images, and we'll say to them, only tell us the things that you don't like in these images, so that that actually helps us understand them better than them saying, oh, I like this, or this is very nice. The I don't like this comments are actually usually more helpful. I had a client, I was showing him a hammam that we had designed. It was a private client doing his house, but I showed him a hammam from a hotel that he said he had liked. And when I showed him the hammam photo, he said, oh no, I hate that. He said, that looks like a place where somebody would go to get murdered. And so I knew that that's not what he wanted, in a way that I didn't really understand when he said, I really like X, Y, or Z in another image.
Is there any restriction, Mark, in you doing that to the client? Do you feel that you're restricting yourself in how you express the design when you give the client a photograph to choose from?
Oh no, not at all. I think that we're generally trying to understand the client better as opposed to less, or restricting ourselves. And also, to be honest, Skura, I think that, well, all of us have to be honest when we're designing buildings, that we're constantly restricting ourselves by our decisions. And they're either our decisions, site decisions, or idea decisions in my mind. And we talk about, in the office, we often talk about the design process as being like a funnel, a narrowing funnel. On the first day of a project, the funnel is as wide as it can possibly be, because in some senses, everything is up for grabs. And every single yes, no decision that you take, and in particular no decision that you take as you move forward, narrows the funnel. And I think that that's actually very helpful, because it means that you're saying no to good ideas. You're not, the ideas that you throw out are not always bad ideas. You can't say yes to everything the whole way through a process, because a design process, because you don't narrow towards a sort of realized point. And so I think that's actually quite a helpful analogy as well with our clients, where we talk about that. We talk about the narrowing of the funnel, and we say to them, you know, we're gonna have to do this. We're gonna have to leave some very good. We're gonna have to kill some very good ideas and leave them by the side of the road. But we all want to know, as we move forward, that we've made that decision well, and from an informed standpoint. Because so often, and I suspect that we've all dealt with this, so often clients loop back to an old idea or an old vision of something that we've all rejected maybe months ago, and they kind of try and revive it or reintroduce it into the funnel. And it's just not possible. You can't, you know, you have to know that you've made these decisions in an informed way, and that you're moving towards that asterisk getting more realized. So that's how we found it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Lovely. Thanks, Mark.
The other thing that we've done and found very helpful in terms of this, it's sort of a mitigating factor as much as anything, is that we found that repeat clients are extremely valuable, in that you don't have to redevelop the conversation from scratch every single time. So we've from a marketing point of view, we've targeted this idea of having what we call the big five, where we'd have 5 core customers, clients that are repeat clients, who we're in a sense constant conversation with. And so every time a project comes up, it's in the context of a pre-existing relationship. We always say relationships are so important, and I think that they're critical. And so we've tried to foster relationships with people that we can work with over and over and over, to try and sort of mitigate some of the difficulty of bringing the client along for the ride. I'm going to use a project as an example. This is a restaurant that we designed, a standalone restaurant that we designed in a valley in Tenerife. That's the site and the view from the site. The site faces due west, and is an evening restaurant. And so we wanted to take advantage of the sunset. So we used everything we learned from Derek Wang. So we set out our from the entrance point of the site, we set out the sunset along the horizon for the whole year, and we gave ourselves that as a very, very strict parameter, so that from that point you would always see the sun hitting the sea. And so we essentially, that was our first line on the page, and then set down this box that framed that view. And this is how we brought our clients along with us. So the project was actually initially called the Sunset Bar, and it became so clear that this was the idea of this building that it became incredibly hard, or no one really wanted to argue against the Sunset Bar or change the Sunset Bar. So there was never a suggestion of revisiting some historical thing, because we'd followed this process of narrowing, but we'd done that together with our client. Similarly, we along the site, let me show you back here, just to the left here, down towards that little white house, that's kind of a pier that goes out, a natural to create the bay. And there was a desire to create a working farm along that left-hand edge, which would relate to the restaurant. And so the restaurant then became, the name of the restaurant then became Granjero Marinero, which means the farmer and the fisherman. And that then informed the what was going to be served in the restaurant. And we had these two very strong axes. So the sunset axis, which connected us to both the sunset and the sea. And then we also had this other long axis in the other direction that connected us directly to the farm, so that the guests from the restaurant could actually walk through the farm either while waiting for their meal or before or after. We had this pre-existing what's called village down on the ocean in front of the restaurant. And so we envisioned this as this kind of frame, the building as a frame, and sitting on the top of this, sort of capping the village, not dominating the village, but kind of becoming the termination point of this bay. That's a very basic sketch showing our design intent of this, really basically building as frame, and the left and right points being determined by the natural conditions on the site. There's quite a lot of elevations that allowed us to conceive of the building looking over the top of the village. And then even in these early sketches, we were constantly thinking, the building is not the hero, the sunset is the hero. And so we're serving that by always maintaining this frame. There was some real need to filter the process of moving from the road on the right to the entrance and into the building on the left. And so we introduced a screen along the back right-hand edge. And so this is the result of that. These are still renders. This is not quite under construction, but goes under construction later this year. So everything serving the view. And in terms of the idea of bringing the client along, this building has hardly changed from inception until now. And I think it's because everybody really has been brought along for the journey. They've come into the garden with us, and they understand that to change one thing would be to lose everything. So that's the Granjero Marinero. Problem number 3. This is a really big one. I know there's not cameras on, but I'm really hoping that everyone's nodding along. So designers love to say collaborate when they actually mean interrupt. So in our experience, very early on, when it was just David and myself sitting in an office, David, myself, and Lee sitting in an office, we were constantly interrupting each other with, good ideas or sometimes not good ideas, but they were interruptions. They were thinly veiled under the guise of collaboration, but they were really, really interruptions. And so quite early on in the company, there were 3 books that heavily influenced us in terms of our thinking on this. The first was two books by a guy named Jason Fried, he's a tech guy. He wrote a book called Rework and another one called Remote, long before working remote was a thing. And both of those books really try and offer an alternative way of working and running an office, and focus largely around the idea that we really are terrible at allowing ourselves to do the work that we ought to do. Fried often makes the point in the books that if people say that they want to get work done, the last place that they think they want to go to is the office. They'll go to the office at 5 in the morning before everybody gets there, or they'll stay home, or they'll go somewhere where they're not going to get interrupted. And so his proposal is that we're really getting it all wrong in that sense. And the book that then kind of gave all of this a real impetus and picture for me was a book by a guy named Cal Newport called Deep Work, which is really, really incredible. Newport defines deep work as the ability to focus on one thing without distraction, usually a cognitively demanding task. He talks about it as a skill that we have to develop that allows us to master complicated things and produce better results more quickly. It means that we give ourselves the best chance of contributing as much value as we can to the world around us and to our neighbors. And so this is something that we've essentially formed our entire garden around the idea that the wall that keeps us out, keeps everybody out, and including ourselves from interrupting one another, is one of the most critical things that we've created. So the result of this is that we've actually structured our entire workday around the concept of deep work. So our 8 till 11 slot in the morning is a deep work slot. We have collaborative meeting times from 11 until 12:30 every single day, which include design reviews and project meetings and ad hocs where everybody can, the meetings can be whatever they need to be. And then we have another deep work slot between 1:30 and 4:30. And we take this so seriously that even as business owner, myself and David, we do not interrupt our own staff in those deep work slots. So I'm between 8 and 11 o'clock, we do not contact one another. We do not interrupt one another. And it means that we really get to do deep work. And it means that our collaboration time, when it does happen, because it's absolutely necessary that we collaborate, is much more pointed and much more valuable, because people have done the deep work necessary to then collaborate. Another idea that's been very helpful in all of this is a philosophy by a guy named Abraham Kuyper, who talks about, it's a concept called sphere sovereignty, where he talks about people being responsible for their own spheres. And then whenever you interact with other spheres, those are the points at which you have to work quite hard at making sure that everybody has what they need. But you have to take responsibility for what's inside we talk about it like almost like mini gardens within the big garden. We have these mini gardens that we all go into for our deep work times, and those we don't interrupt one another when we're in those gardens. And it's the onus is on us as the staff to take the right tools and toys to go and play in that walled garden for that time period, and to see what comes out of that. It also means that the campfire, whenever we join together, becomes really important, which is why we have those daily touch points of the 11 a.m. and the ad hocs. I could talk more about this, but I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to show you another project where we learned many of these lessons. And I think this is one of the things that, if I think back to this project, this is in Egypt. One of the things that we really loved about this was the fact that we were left alone by our clients, and we then kind of left each other alone to develop this design through deep work and then through pointed collaboration. So this is a hotel for a brand called Kasakuk, which is on the Red Sea, so on the east coast of Egypt. It's in a resort town, but the town and the town doesn't really contribute to the feel of this hotel. The idea here was very much a connection between the entrance, which we are at now, and the Red Sea, which is top right of this image. It's quite a windy area, so there's a lot of kite surfing, and so the sea really then is the draw from this central point, from this entrance point down across, and then everything in between becomes very village-like, all forming these paths which are centralized and connect all of the guests down to the beach really easily. This is the restaurant building on the right, and that's the main path. So wherever we have opportunity, we're creating these focused axes that draw you towards the ocean. The buildings, the property is on the east coast, but running along behind the property is I think it's the mountain range. There's a mountain range that basically divides the coast from the Sahara Desert, and so that's the backdrop to the hotel. And we use the coloration of that mountain to pick the color for the hotels. For all of the buildings. This is another project in Germany, just outside Frankfurt. This is not our building. This is almost like, if you imagine, it's a bit like Hans Hallen's glass house in its feeling. It's an old building from that sort of same era. It's a conference center, but we were invited to do some interior work and looking at some of the courtyard spaces. And so again, this was very much left alone because our client had a very strong idea. This bar, for example, they wanted it to feel totally of the building, but at the same time something that felt new. And so yeah, we felt like we were, as I say, left alone on this project, and again, really enjoyed it. I think the distance between us and our clients can often help in the being left alone. We really have struggled if I'm honest, we've really struggled with South African clients, particularly sort of construction companies and project managers, to understand, for example, that I'm not available between 8 and 11. To them, I mean, I've had I'm sure all of you have had by like 9 o'clock, 2 missed calls and 3 emails, and somebody says you're very hard to get a hold of. And what you're trying to do is do the actual work as opposed to just communicating about the work, and rather doing the communication at pointed times. It's not easy. Also, what is also not easy is problem number 4, managing projects that start outside of your control. I know we all have to deal with this. This was a project that we did at the beginning of this year for a client. It was a repeat client, which was very helpful because even though the project just literally stopped overnight, they were very good and paid us for the work that we had done. But projects do stop and start outside of our control. It's hard to plan work in advance. It's not, I was thinking about, it's not like a coffee shop. If a coffee shop one day just no one came, it would kind of be okay because the next day is just around the corner. Whereas in architecture, we can be working on projects with 200 people, and overnight the project can just stop, and you've kind of planned your life around it, and it can be really, really difficult. Our experiment on this, and I think this is potentially one of the hardest things with running a practice, our experiment with this has been to control what we can and to stay calm. So we try and have a sales funnel where our goal is to always have projects that are in our sales funnel with the total fee value of about 4 times our annual turnover, which means that we kind of don't want to get 3 out of 4 of our inquiries, which does allow us to choose our projects at times. And it also allows us to potentially turn on the taps a little bit. If we have projects that are around, we know that we could get them if possibly we went in with a slightly lower fee. It somewhat allows us to control our own workflow. We also try and have 4 months of operating cash on hand at all times, which also means that we can only take, as directors, we only take out money when it doesn't affect that. And I guess if you think about the peaks and troughs of workflow, with a solid horizontal line being your human resources, there are those peaks that need to be filled, and then there's troughs that you kind of have to fill as well. And so a lot of companies, I think, the peaks get filled with more staff, which often leads to future retrenching. And we've really wanted to avoid that and have avoided that. The other option is that everybody just works super late hours and does more than one person's job, kind of whatever it takes. And for us, we have tried to fill those peaks, manage those peaks with our routines, like I've been saying, but also with the inclusion of collaborators that know how we work. And so people can come in for these bursts of work rather than us filling that up with overheads. It's more costly in the short term to operate like that, but we've seen it benefit us in the long term, and that we don't get stuck with an overhead that we can't afford. And then the other problem with the peaks and troughs are the troughs, and that often you find that companies will focus in the trough time, they will focus on billable hours. So you only want to be working on something that's billable because you want to kind of bring that trough up as much as you can. And for us, because we've taken the approach to the cash on hand and things like that, we've used those trough periods as accelerating our internal working on our own processes. So our RP time is often our main focus on those trough periods, and trying to remain calm within that. And for us, we also accept a reduction in profitability in the short term. So we generally don't look at our profitability. We try not to look at our profitability quarter to quarter. We try and think about it with a broader view. Yeah, I suspect this is an area that we will learn a lot still. I know that I'm young, but that's kind of how we've approached the work that's outside of your control. More pictures. This project was, as I said, for an existing client, and we normally wouldn't do arches. It's not kind of a natural thing that we tend towards. But they had specifically asked for us to look at Nubian architecture. And so we kind of went all in, and we actually really enjoyed the learning curve that came with this project. So that was something. Okay, and then the last problem is what I've entitled keeping things honest. And so for me, what this problem is about is that generally, I think the architectural profession and our clients are constantly aiming for the next thing. So there's this desire to stay fresh in some way. And we have found that it doesn't work like that. Seeking freshness doesn't get you, or seeking originality doesn't normally get you there. There's a quote by C.S. Lewis. He says, "No man who cares about originality will ever be original. It's the man who only thinks about doing a good job or telling the truth who becomes really original and doesn't notice it." So we've focused, in our company, we have focused on design truth-telling, essentially, as Lewis talks about it, truth-telling over originality seeking. And the way that we do that, some of them I've already talked about. Design as a conversation with a client. So you're in constant conversation with the client, with the site, with the context, with history. So we often will do this where we talk about source. This page here kind of shows an idea of thinking which we talk about, which is source, abstraction, and design. And so we look for these examples, and we find them all over the place. So the source being this kind of dappled nut that comes from a palm tree, the abstraction being an umbrella, and actually then the design possibly being something that has its roots in something much more pure on the left-hand edge. We also have a huge interest in critical regionalism, and I think it's very important because of the nature of our work, which is all over the place. Getting to grips with the right amount of local knowledge, both in terms of history, but also in terms of the construction processes. We've worked very hard at understanding what we need to understand and leaving to our local partners what needs to be left to them. And that's always a balancing act, but it's been critical to how we've worked. I was recently visiting a new project in Naxos, an island in Greece, and I was with my client, and he asked me. I had an afternoon free at the end of the trip which he wanted to fill up, and he said to me, "Do you want to go and see the contemporary competition, that would compete with what we're wanting to do here, or do you want to go and see the old villages around the corner?" And I immediately chose the old villages, and the reason being is that I don't really want to be looking at what somebody else has done. I want to look at what came before. There was a composer he was composing a piece of music, or the score for a Star Wars show that I've watched and loved. He obviously the Star Wars music is extremely famous and hard to get away from in your head if you've heard it. And so this composer, who was a young guy, was talking about John Williams composed the original score for Star Wars. But this young guy talked about not wanting to be inspired by John Williams and produce a score, but rather to go to what John Williams was inspired by and kind of filter his design through that historical and kind of lengthy process of time. And that's something that we think about really genuinely, and we really do try and look past the contemporary examples of something to what had happened before, and so we've found that bears quite a lot of fruit. think I have one more project to show. I was trying to finish it, so here we go. This is a project which in some ways is a culmination of all of what I've been talking about. This is a client with a property down the bottom with a sloped piece of land up behind them, which was just grass and landscaping. They had a need for, so to think about the, what's it called, the schedule of accommodation, they had a need for some studio space. My client, she does ceramic pottery and industrial design. They also needed a space for the husband's wine and whiskey collection, and they also wanted to enjoy the benefits of being up on the hill behind the house because of the view and the sea breeze. And so they wanted to be able to share that with friends. And so in a sense, that was the schedule of accommodation. We walked up onto the site together and looked over the top of their house towards the view that they wanted to enjoy, and kind of stood up there and said, well, if we can make it feel, we were just standing on the side of the hill in the grass. If we can make it feel like this when we're finished, then that would be a real success, because in some ways, this is the best that you're ever going to get. You've got nothing encumbering you. And so through a conversation with that client, we got to this idea, which was from them, that they wanted to create, up on the hill there behind the house, they wanted to create a place where James Bond would want to have a drink. And so that became our kind of calling card and their idea. And so in the conversation between us and the site and them, and this idea of James Bond having a drink, that developed and grew. And before long, we had this notion that we didn't want to see the building from the house. We realized that we could actually, like a bunker, we could actually hide this folly up on the hill, and they could have friends visit them down in the house multiple times and never ever know that the building up on the hill existed. And so that took on a life of its own as a notion. And so this kind of 20-degree sloped piece of land, we madly decided that we were going to dig the building entirely under the ground, and follow the top 20-degree slope for our roof. And thankfully, this happened during lockdown. So these poor gentlemen spent all of lockdown carrying sandbags up and down out of this massive hole that they created, extremely bravely. I take my head off to the construction teams in every site that I go to. The idea, this is obviously the back retaining wall, which then got formalized with the concrete over the back. We also have the other thing that I haven't talked about at all, but from a relationship point of view, the contractor obviously plays a huge role, and I alluded to it at the beginning when I was talking about Dean, but the relationship with the contractor can't be overstated. There you see them starting to get the 20-degree slope of the roof, following the slope of the ground. And because of the nature of the building being underground, we wanted to needed to bring some natural light into the space. And so we looked at kind of Soviet brutalist architecture, kind of thinking, I guess, a bit like James Bond's enemies in that sense. And so we had this idea of forming these tubes that brought light down into the building, and would be the only thing that would pop up above ground level, above the roof. And so that's then the creation of those inside means that we've got these light wells which come in, and then in quite a playful way, we looked at the ways in which those tubes would bring light down into the space. And so we tilted the base of those tubes depending on the location of the three main tubes, so that we would get different light on different walls, different times of the day, and really connect, I guess, with the site. we took the decision to use raw gum poles on the inside of those tubes, and leave it raw, and then we have a kind of hidden piece of glass up above which doesn't actually touch the tops of those tubes. Again, I suppose I had Derek Wang in my head. I was thinking that I needed to get some of the air out of the back of this bunker, and so we allowed the air up through these tubes with a gap between the glass and the tubes themselves. And the idea really is that as you approach the building, that this is the first. It's not yet finished. I wish it was to show photos for this group, but you approach the building through the landscape, and quite intentionally, this landscaping pushes you away from the building for a large portion of the walk up the hill, and then just at the end, you make the turn around. And obviously, maybe not obviously, but the idea here is that the landscaping really takes over. That this gap disappears, that this has plants falling over the top. But similarly, this roof has the same thing. That sliding door then opens up fully. This is the studio space, and then just to the left is go into that gap is a space for a kiln and a working studio, which has then two more smaller tubes, which end level because they relate to almost to task lighting for the worktop. That's the little gap through to the cellar, to the wine and whiskey. We made that gap. I'm not even sure if this is legal, but we made that gap 600 mils. There's no frame, but the gap itself is 600. And part of the client's intention there was that if he can't fit through the 600 mil gap to get to his wine and whiskey, then it'll force him to work out, and he'll have to lose some weight. So he's building in a incentive to keep himself fit.
Great.
I think that is the last photo.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark. Max, right on this project, it is very plausible that you use these, if I want to call them light shoots coming down. It means that you are not really concerned about how how the building will look like at the end than how the building functions. So it's an intelligent building, so to speak, because it's not obsessed about just form, but it's obsessed about function and what it delivers in terms of space. That is actually quite interesting.
Yeah, and those are results of the same, in some sense, the same thing for us, that we don't want to separate form making from the experience and the functioning of inside of the building. I didn't talk about Peter Zumthor is a huge influence on me and the practice. And one of the things that Zumthor talks about, he kind of takes on the notion of being a purely of any designer being purely rational. And he actually, he talks about how we use our experiences and our memories and our ongoing experiences to shape spaces around us. And I think that it's a more honest way of thinking about design than pretending, because I think a lot of architecture can be pretending that we're entirely rational and it's all about the function. And we're quote unquote modernists. Where in reality we all, I don't know, maybe I'll stand and say I do this, but I suspect we all do. We think about what it's going to feel like to be in that building, and we consider the emotions and the rhythm of life that's going to result that's going to be in there. And it's not all just about how it works. But if those things can be working together, I think then you can be in a pretty joyous place.
Lovely, Mark. I'm not an all-out fan of Frank Gehry, But what he says is away with functional architects and their functionaries. So what he's talking about is exactly what you are saying is, if we are completely obsessed about how the building works only and are not putting enough time and effort in the poetry of the things coming together. So yeah, that's really great. Mark, I think it's a new generation architect thing to talk about a relationship between the architect and contractor. When I started architecture, the architect was king, and the architect could shout instructions and etc. etc. And I realized as time goes on that you actually must collaborate with your contractor. Yep. And you may miss something that he brings to you, and you actually avoid a court case. How was your experience with that? I know that you alluded to it just now.
Yeah, I mean, we have different types of relations with our contractors. Our contractor, say, on Egypt, was he answered to the local construction team, and there is a much more like when I was on site, they really wanted to impress, and it was a little bit like what you described, a little bit like the master. I'd walk around and then I'd say, oh, that's not how the drawing is. You know, that there needs to be a gap there. You've built a wall and there's actually a shadow line under that building. And then I'd carry on carry on the tour. And when I got back to that same point, which was near the entrance, they'd already fixed it, they'd already bashed it back, and they were eager to impress. Our local work is much more like what you've described, and it's much more how I enjoy working in terms of the construction process, in that we have a very respectful and very good relationship with our contractors wherever we can. I didn't want to knock the JVCC, but or make this about contracts and things, but there's definitely ways of thinking about it that you really do try and put the spirit of the building contract in place, less than the. I ran that project. I don't think I've referred to the JVCC once with that client or contractor, but it's in place. It's there. But it's not. Everybody is. How do we? So the way I like to talk about it is if two people are sitting having a conversation about something, it's really, really helpful if they are not looking at each other as much as looking at the thing in question. And if everybody is not being adversarial, looking over the boardroom table at one another, but actually saying, the building over there is the thing that we all want to be built, and we want it to be built well and to the best of all of our abilities. We want an excellent built environment and product. Then that posture changes from one of two people looking at each other and saying, well, it's your fault or it's your fault, but actually looking at something else, which is outside of them. And that takes, separation of the ego. It takes all kinds of things to pull off. But I think it's being possible for us, and not pretending that we haven't failed and made mistakes, but it's that's certainly our goal.
Yeah. Okay. All right, colleagues, I'm going to open the floor to anybody who would like to interact with Mark, questions or comments. And while I wait for that, Mark, there's some of the results are right on the beach. And what's the EIA implication in the that you're building?
Yeah, they differ place by place. That project in Tenerife that I was showing you, there's a rule that within 150 meters of the coastline, you are not allowed to have any beds, but you can have public buildings. So you can have restaurants, receptions, beach clubs, but you can't have rooms or beds. And that's been quite an interesting one, which I've kind of found quite helpful and enjoyed. Egypt has its own one where no building is within 105 meters of the coastline, and they've actually extended that to 200 meters now. Yeah, it differs place by place, and it's kind of one of those vagaries that you have to get to grips with whenever we've got a list of questions that we ask, and whenever we start a new project, and that's if it's a coastal project, that's one of the things we ask is what are the constraints on the operating within the coastline.
Needless to say, you work with the local architects every time you implement? Yes.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So we always in some senses in that way don't practice architecture actively. In that we do a pack of drawings that we give to them, which is fairly comprehensive, and we will often include what we call blue lines. So we'll actually make our notes on the drawings. So our drawing doesn't look like a construction drawing or even like a design drawing. It's more like we've given them all of the rationale for the decisions that we've made and the things that we see as critical. So we do blue lines where our drawings just have all of our notes. So it's almost like notes to the architect.
Yeah.
Like this wall is really critical because of these reasons. This, like the Granero Marinero is an example where the left and right walls that frame the sunset they need to be where we position them because they're positioned according to the sun. So we'll put that onto our blue lines, and then we are responsible for the responsibility shifts to the local architect for the construction and licensing, but we get sight of, we call it review and support. So we get sight of all of their drawings to ensure design fidelity, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So no, lovely work, man. For the time you've been present. Thank you so much for sharing. Colleagues, anybody with a question or comment? For Mark? Monique, and then
Mark, sorry, this is Graham Smith here. This is the first time I've been witness to one of these Zoom call things, and I really appreciate having been invited to come and listen to this. It's really good, and it's great to see architecture in South Africa going as well as it is. I do agree with you wholeheartedly. I think without the contractor's input, you must work as a team, and I've always done that throughout my practice life, and I've been retired 10 years now, but I just find that without the contractor, half the buildings wouldn't get built, and I just take my hat off to the construction industry generally. But thank you indeed for letting me take part in this little thing. It's been great.
Thank you, Graham.
I hope I'll be invited again next time.
You are always welcome, Graham. Every 2 weeks or so. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you
great.
so much.
Many thanks.
Okay, Monique, I think Dima's hand is lowered. Monique.
Hi, Mark.
Monique.
Thanks for doing this practice breakfast, and to Skura for always organizing. I'm just completely blown away by the work that you're doing. I think the way that you've approached your practice in an intelligent and considered sense. I think when I grow up, I'd like to be you one day.
Hi, Monique.
You know, I'm actually not surprised, because when you first started your practice and we were collaborating a little bit together, I could definitely see the greatness there. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your work with us. I know it's you have to be very brave to step into that space. So we really appreciate it, and we really appreciate the way that you've shared with us the depth to which you think about architecture and processes and practice. So yeah, I'd just like to say thank you.
Thank you, Monique.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique. Any other comments? Adima, are you back? Stavis?
Sorry, how's it? I just had to go get a cake out the oven quickly. So not so much a question, but a reflection on what you've shared this morning. And I promise my attention's been here, even though the cake's been in the oven. But I really just want to talk to this idea of I suppose humility, because I think knowing you, it's kind of a constant thread in what you do. But the idea, and I suppose being fixed in architectural education now, I think the idea of humility kind of shifts those notions. And I talk often to the students about this idea of the dominant presence of personalities versus positionalities in architecture. You know, this idea of iconism over the celebration of place. And I think that your presentation today really speaks to that value. And just ditto on the fangirling Zumta, but really lovely presentation. And thank you for showing something that's in flux and truthful. I think it's always a really lovely way to start the Friday morning. I always end up thanking Fura and congratulating him for bringing the discussion to the fore. But thank you, Mark, also for the truth.
Thanks,
Fura.
Thank you. You definitely sense the innocence and the honesty, Mark, in your work. Well done.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's not. When you forced me to do this, Skura, I didn't feel up to the task, but I've enjoyed reflecting.
Yeah. I think it's like we had a dialogue last night at the institute about transport. And the leader of public transport from eThekwini ETA said, you know what, when you're reading my bio, it gave me a moment to reflect. And so sometimes we actually do so much work and we are busy with deadlines and chasing this deadline and therefore this invoice, etc. And we don't actually get a time to reflect. And I think practice breakfasts are for reflection. Sometimes you may think that maybe I don't have much to show, but once you actually put together everything that you've done over the years, you realize that it's been quite a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, so lovely, Mark. Ivan?
Hi, Mark. Well done. And I think that it's a really interesting way you've actually put together the process of architecture and the process involving so many different ways of doing things, and the pragmatic approach you've taken to working and producing architecture. I really appreciate it, and I think you've done a great job. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thanks, Albert. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Any other comment, please? Why do we wait? Ken, are you coming in? Yes, come.
Thanks, Skura. Mark, hi. We haven't actually met, but anyway, thank you very much for the presentation. It's most stimulating. But tell us a little bit about how much time do you need to spend on reaching out? I noticed that you've been doing projects in Tenerife and Egypt and Mauritius. Do you spend an incredible amount of time making contact with people elsewhere? Are these a result of competitions, or how are you getting to your clients? Do you spend 20% of your time reaching out or not?
Yeah, I think
all forms part of practice and practice time.
Yeah. I think I alluded to the relationships idea, and you know, within the how we think about marketing in the big five. That's one massive area is trying to identify people that we could work with over and over and making contact with them. So we have a list. We have one big five at the moment nailed on. We call him as in he's going to come to us and work with us over and over. And then we have 4 targets that we've identified. We don't know that they're on our target list for to be our big five. But then we also dream, and we have an audacious list as well that we keep of saying, well, imagine we could work with that person, or imagine we could work with that brand. And then we look. You do have to be you do have to be physically there. So I do travel a lot, and relationships lead to relationships. So when I'm in one place, I'll give you an example. I was having dinner with a client. I just presented that Egypt project. Actually, I just presented that in Berlin to the hotel owner, and I was with my kind of contact who we work with a lot in Berlin. And we were talking through something, and he said to me, he was actually asking me how visas work for a South African, because he doesn't understand the concept as a German. And then I was explaining the Schengen region to him and explaining what a visa is and what that means. And then he said to me, "Oh, so you could go to Spain if you want, if we wanted to." And I said, "Yeah, I could go to Spain." And he said, "Okay, I need you to change your flights. I need you to go to Spain tomorrow. I need you to meet this person. I need you to go to this side." And I changed my flights and came home via Barcelona. So I think that those face-to-face meetings and the links that happen through them are, I think it works the same way. It's just for us, it's global as opposed to, local. Yeah.
Very good question, Ken. Thank you. Mark, so when I used to work for Starch Forster, I was at the Cape Town office for about a month, and on Friday, every second Friday, between tea time, which is about 10, for about an hour, you would have someone present something. So you have to go research something for about an hour. You have to present to the team. It kind of keeps people aware of what's happening. It kind of energizes the office, etc. And I heard you speaking about the whole idea of having a time set out for how you set out your systems to work, because we could be very easily as architects lost in how we produce work, and from 8 to 5, whatever the time that we choose to be our office times. How can you measure the success of being able to say, you know what, from this time to this time, this is what we do, and it contributes to to how the practice function? Are you able to measure that? Can you be able to share how you feel it has contributed to your practice?
So maybe just to the way we structured the day is the goal of the structure of the day is to wall off the garden of the deep work time. So we want to create the opportunity for each other where we're able to, in an uninterrupted way, dive extremely deeply into whatever is set for you that morning. Carl Newport says that in his research, he thinks that the limit that one person can do in deep work in one day is 4 hours. And we've actually got 2-3 hour slots. So we've kind of intentionally over-spec'd on the time, knowing that we're humans and we're growing in our kind of fitness for that deep work time. But the deep work time, the being in the garden time, is only possible because of the walls that we built around the interruptions and the protecting of each other's time. And so what then becomes necessary, and I think what you're talking about is then the collaboration and the touch points in the middle of the day when we have that 11 a.m. We have that 11 a.m. is exactly the same every single day. We have 15 minutes where we run through the board. We call it the board. It's our deep work slots for the morning and for the afternoon. For generally, we're planning in about 3 weeks in advance. So like I can tell you, if I look at the board, I could tell you that on Thursday in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be working on that project, and I'm going to be doing this thing. And then so we have that, and that's about adjusting the board if we have to, and making sure that no one's got any issues that's stopping them from doing what they need to do. Everyone's got the right tools and the right toys. We then have a design review slot, which is 15 minutes. and that the intention of that, and it's a big part of what we do, is making our work visible to each other. So the value of not just staying in your cave, not just staying in the garden, but actually bringing it out into the open and keeping everybody up to speed with what you're working on, even though that, you know, we don't have to all know exactly what's happening on every single project, but having that kind of working knowledge because we're sharing constantly. We then have a project meeting, which is a half an hour. And then we have the 2 ad hoc starts from 12:15, the 12 to 12:15 and 12:15 to 12:30. And those are totally up for grabs, like I say. So every single day, we had an intern last year. So she had access to every single person in the company every single day if she wanted it. If she wanted to take somebody up and say, can you speak to me for 15 minutes about X? She could do that. If you wanted to speak to me or David or anybody, we're all available for each other, obviously within the limits of the slots. I don't know what I would do if we didn't have that structure for the day. I don't have any KPIs to measure it or say this is what it is or isn't. But if you said you have to take that away, I'm not sure what I would do. I might go do something else other than architecture. And I think that comes to
that answers it.
Yeah, seeing the value of the deep work time. Yeah,
that answers it. Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you. I don't know if there's any more questions.
I'm putting those 3 books in the what's it called, in the chat. Somebody was asking about the names of the books. I'll just put them in there.
And do you do work in South Africa, Mark? Let's just ask.
We do work in South Africa. We have the our goal is to try and always have one active project in South Africa that we can visit. And the reason for that is because we don't see ourselves as being disconnected from the construction process, even though we are physically separated from it often. And so we want to be able to get some Berea sand on our shoes, everyone in the office throughout the year, to stay up with that. And I put that down to what I was saying at the beginning of how much I learned, and the Dean and Paul being on site. I don't want us to not have that and become this philosophical, ethereal, like in your head type of practice. I very much see the connection between what we do and the built object at the end of the day. And so I don't want to disconnect that. So my goal is to have one, be a bit selective if we can, but one ongoing project in the practice at any one time.
In the country,
yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I thought it was clear and precise. Colleagues, any other question from Mark? Any comment? Yes, Monique again.
I have one question for you, Mark. And it relates to the concept of scheduling your day and the deep work time, which I mean, honestly, I think we can all see the value of that. But how do you adjust for the unknowns? Where, I mean, often my whole day will go pear-shaped because I'll need to do a meeting and the person will only be available at this time, or there's a group of people and the only time we can schedule it is for that time. I find that those random interruptions often can throw that schedule out. I mean, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that does happen, and I think it's if we're honest, and I'm honest with myself, it happens more to me as the director than to the staff. So one of the big goals for me is to protect the staff's time and to be that buffer. So that would be the one thing I say. The other thing I would say on that is that in actually practicing this, I've seen that it's not nearly, there are not nearly as many anomalies as you think. I think it's easy in your head to think that they're all anomalies, but when you start to standardize and protect your time, you see that they're there, but they're not as kind of, I don't know, they're not as prevalent often as we think they are. And I think we can use that as an excuse to not structure something, because you say, oh, but the chaos is going to come. So you kind of choose, but at that point you really are saying, well, it's all going to be chaotic. And you're kind of choosing the chaos rather than saying, well, let me try and protect my time. And then the third thing I would say, and the last thing I would say, is I do have a structure in my week, which is different than my staff's, in that I generally try and I split my day in half between maker mornings and manager afternoons. So I try and protect my freshest hours of my day when I'm in the morning to do the work, to do the deep work, real deep work, no interruptions. And then if I can, push meetings or interruptions and things to the afternoon, I do that. So I try and split my day like that.
All right.
Okay, no, thanks. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark.
I can't believe I escaped without Dean or Paul saying anything to me. It was
exactly.
I feel like I've gotten off the.
You're here. Thank you for joining in. It's actually great. I think it's actually a sign of the profession growing when you work for someone and they can actually support you. I used to work for Fiverr Daniel at Stash Foster, and he supports me. It's like it's the growth of the industry. It's not like your enemies now, and so it's really great to have Dean and Paul log in. That's really great. I don't think they have anything to say. They're happy.
Mark, I think they both want to be like you when they grow up too.
It's the beard, Mark. Yeah. No, thank you so much, everyone. Mark, thank you so much for putting that together. That was great. You gave us insight in how your firm works and how your dealings are overseas and all that. So we appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Any parting shot from yourself?
No, just really thank you for the opportunity, Skura. I appreciate this, and I think it is such a great platform to be able to, like you say, not be enemies, because really we're all we're all serving the same thing. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for
very
joining
much.
in.
Bye.
Thanks, Mark. Cheers, everyone.
Everyone. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.